Welcome to Saturday Morning Trek, just one of many podcasts on Trek FM. If you'd like to help keep Star Trek discussion coming your way each day, consider becoming a network patron through Patreon. Visit patreon.com/trekfm and find out how you can become part of the team. That's patreon.com/trekfm.
This is Walter Koenig, Chekhov from Star Trek, and you're listening to Trek FM.
Get set now for action and adventure. Future's here for us to see. It's 2200 AD.
Their mission, to fight injustice, to right that which is wrong, and
to boldly go where no man has gone before.
Welcome to Saturday Morning Trek. Join us at Trek FM as we harken back to the days of wood-paneled dens, console televisions, and President Obama serving aboard the Enterprise. I'm Aaron Harvey, and today we have a familiar person joining us in the wood-paneled den. Let me pull up a beanbag for my friend, Tristan Ridell. Tristan, welcome. This is like the first time that we've recorded together.
I know, this is really, really weird because you and I, we know each other, we've hung out together, we've obviously met, and it's weird because I feel like we have recorded with each other before, but I sat down, I put on the headphones, and I was like, oh, wow, this is new.
Yeah, and you know, we at Star Trek Las Vegas, we all talked for the entire, 5 days we were there or something like that.
Yeah.
So it does feel like we have actually recorded something, but we haven't. And today, the reason I have you on the show instead of Adam is that we're going to compare the time trap with a kind of similar episode from Voyager called The Void.
Yes, this is going to be my first post to the Journey Trek FM show. And it feels like a warm blanket, you know, because we're talking about Voyager. So it's a nice dip into the toe of post to the journeyness.
Yay, I'm glad. So before we dive in here, why don't I give a little bit of a description of the time trap episode from the animated series and The Void from Star Trek Voyager. While exploring the Delta Triangle, a mysterious region of space where a large number of starships have disappeared over the past few centuries, the USS Enterprise and a Klingon battlecruiser are drawn into a pocket universe where they encounter a graveyard of ships. Some of the original crew and descendants have survived and have formed a peaceful coalition called the Elysian Council. They say that no violence is allowed and no escape is possible. With the time trap draining their dilithium crystals, the Klingons and the Enterprise must cooperate in order to escape. After stopping the Klingon attempt to destroy the Enterprise, they successfully emerge, with the Klingons taking full credit for their escape. Meanwhile, in Star Trek Voyager, traveling through the Delta Quadrant towards Earth, the USS Voyager becomes trapped in a region of space where other stranded starships prey on each other to survive. Refusing to give weapons to one of the trapped ships, their supplies are stolen and they discover a wounded humanoid creature while searching for supplies among other abandoned vessels. They realize the only way to escape is to form a sort of federation of ships with all the people that are trapped there. And with help from the injured creature and the rest of his kind, which are native to the Void, they escape. After saying their goodbyes, Voyager returns on its course to home. So this episode aired November 24th, 1973. It was written by Joyce Perry, and she was an actress and a writer. As an actress, she was in shows like The Man from U.N.C.L.E., Petticoat Junction, Kung Fu, Bonanza, and then there's sort of that Star Trek tie-in where she was on the Lucy show. So this might be how she got her into Star Trek. And as a writer, she wrote the movie The Mosquito Squadron, which was a World War II movie. She wrote episodes of Ironside, Eight is Enough, The Waltons, Fantasy Island, and Land of the Lost, where we have a lot of Star Trek people who had written. We had David Gerrold, we had Walter Koenig, Dorothy Fontana. So it's sort of, the Land of the Lost became sort of this like collection of random Star Trek people. I'm sure there were more people. I just don't know.
Kind of like gargoyles and voice actors.
Exactly. Yes.
Next Generation.
I always, we actually talked about that on our Super Crew episode. We were just like, too bad that Patrick Stewart wasn't able to do a voice on there, because that would have been amazing.
I never really thought of that, but you're right. There was one piece missing.
Yeah. And no, I love gargoyles. And that was, I believe that Darren chose Goliath as his security guard or security officer for his Super Crew. So that was great.
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah, that'd be terrifying.
Yes.
That'd be more terrifying than Worf.
That's true. I ended up getting Boba Fett from the animated Star Wars special. And it was just like, all my crew, like, to get the people that felt like they could actually man a ship, it was, some of them were bad guys, just because they had the smarts, and they weren't, like, talking dogs. Because I had to choose from the 1970s, he was choosing from the 90s, and he had a much better pool of qualified Starship crew. So, speaking of voices, in this episode, James Doohan did the voice of 6 characters. This was, I think, his maximum amount of characters that he played. Nichelle Nichols did 4 characters, and George Takei did 3. So it sort of suffers, I think, a little bit from, you just hear the same voices over and over again. There's only so many. James Doohan is actually very good at modulating and changing his voices. Nichelle and George, not so much.
Yeah, it was funny. While I was watching it, the Klingon came on the screen, and I was just like, wait a second. There are certain times, there's sometimes it can get in the way where it takes you out of it, but then there are other times when I'm watching Bob's Burgers or something.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden, I'm just like, oh, that random person in the corner, that was H. John Benjamin too. Like, oh, wait, that person in the restaurant, that was H. John Benjamin too. I was like, what, did they just run out of time? And they're just like, John, come here. Wasn't this the most voices that Nichelle ever had in an episode?
I think
of the
so.
animated series?
Yeah, I believe so. I think
it was either that or like, I don't know, I think the Lorelei signal. It was between these two,
I think it might actually be a tie. I think I think she did 4 voices in both of them. But she has kind of the same wispy sort of voice when she doesn't do her own voice.
I liked, what was it, Devna? The Orion?
Yes.
Like, it was Devna. I liked her interpretation of Devna. Don't ask me why she was in a bikini the entire time. But when she's
an Orion slave girl.
But when she did the psychic girl,
yes,
like that one where I was just like, really, Nichelle, like that is the direction that you want to go. Like, they are putting a device in the warp control room. Oh no! Like, I was just, oh man! But you could tell it was Nichelle, and I was laughing so hard at that. It was so much fun.
It felt very much like a Monty Python character.
It did.
Yes.
It did. I didn't think of that. I didn't realize that until you said it.
Very, very much so. Yeah. I when I was watching this with my boyfriend, we watched Time Trap and The Void kind of one after another, and he's just like, "Can I leave now? Because that voice is driving me bonkers."
It was it was quite an issue. What did you think about that? Like, what did you with the episode? What did you think about them being able to detect things outside of the ship using that? Like, it wasn't like they didn't stop violence because of technology. They stopped violence because they had some species that
psionic
had
powers. Yeah,
psionic powers or something like that. What did you think about that? Because normally in Star Trek, it's just like, oh, thank God we have the blah-de-de-blah machine.
Well, it's funny. It's like, and I guess we can jump right into our conversation, and how these are similar. That in the Voyager episode, The Void, I started to tune out at a certain point where, like, when they were first there and they were trying to get out, because it was just your blobbity blobbity. It was that the technobabble for like 5 or 10 minutes. I'm like, this is a wasted opportunity that you could put some story in, as opposed to, we have to get out, and so let me tech the tech. And I don't know, that I did like at least the difference in the using psionic powers, which is, it's very different for Star Trek. I mean, it is and it isn't, because you've got Spock, who has the ability to sense things. We've had that in the in the original series, so but never to quite that degree.
Yeah, I mean, like, Star Trek is no stranger to psychic abilities, but at the same time, it's used in a very different way.
Mm-hmm.
It, like, normally when we see psychic abilities, it's used in a much more personal way or an interpersonal way.
That's true.
It's not used too terribly much. Not until Kess, like in the last like half of season 3 or the very beginning of season 4, where we started seeing mental abilities used outside of, like, oh, I can read your thoughts. And I very rarely do we see it interact with technology.
Yeah. No, that's true. I thought that was really interesting, especially it seemed like they had a specific empathy towards violence. So it was like, I don't know if they could have done the same thing, like, oh, let me just move this thing out of the way because I want to. It felt like it was almost like a defense mechanism.
Yeah.
Which would be kind of interesting to... And Dayton Ward, friend of the network, has written a book that is sort of a sequel to The Time Trap. It's an ebook. And I'm in the middle of reading it, so I can't speak to it exactly, but I believe they revisit that character and her abilities. So that would be...
Oh, yeah. I want to read that. I didn't know that existed.
Yep. It's from 2004, and it's called Star Trek Where Time Stands Still, the Star Trek Starfleet Corps of Engineers book number 44, and you can find it on Amazon. Before we dive too deep into the comparisons, there was also another story from a year before the animated series came out that was nearly identical to the animated series from the GoldKey comics, which was The Museum at the End of Time. There was the Enterprise is chasing a Klingon battle cruiser, and they end up in this swirling vortex of, quote, rampant star nodes and galactic debris. And they get sucked into a sort of limbo void area with no stars, and they find all of these ships floating around that they hadn't seen before for centuries, and they stumble across a floating island, which basically is a museum on a chunk of land from a planet that blew up and threw it into the void, which kind of reminded me of Argo City from Superman a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
And they were populated by many races, and then they were peaceful, and Spock basically figures a way to get out if both the Klingon ship and the Enterprise fire at this one spot. They can create a dimensional gate and get out, and they offer the inhabitants the ability to come with them, and they're like, no, we like it here, and so they take off, which is like very similar to what the animated series episode was like.
Yeah, this is this concept, like you said, has been used several times before, and I really like this concept. This is a very fascinating concept to me because I always like it when said story, whether it's outside of the realm of Star Trek or within, when they really explore the culture that is that society that is trapped inside. I mean, like, it's become a trope where we discover the society, but then we're like, well, we know our heroes aren't going to stay there and become a part of the society.
And it was kind of interesting when we were watching The Void. Mitchell was saying, had this show been made today, that might have been a multi-episode or even a season arc, or that could even have been its own show, because you could have dealt with somebody stuck in this pocket universe and they're trying to get out. It's almost like Voyager within Voyager. You got them stuck in the Delta Quadrant, but then you have them stuck in a void. But I thought that was an interesting comment, because we also had the episode where Tuvok and, was it Paris, were stuck in that sort of like gravity well that it's kind of has similar tinges to that too.
That's a very solid episode. I really enjoy that episode. Not everybody does. It's got a character called Nos, which is played by Lori Petty. I'm a huge Lori Petty fan.
I think if you don't like Lori Petty, that's where you might have a problem, because she's very Lori Petty.
I think it's interesting though about how it's a very fascinating tale of how people cope in this type of situation. Like Tuvok, he's a Vulcan and he's a married man, but yet he flirts with the idea of potentially pairing off with Lori Petty. I believe the episode's name is Gravity, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yes, that's what it is.
And yeah, it's just that kind of storyline fascinates me. And I believe that this was also used in a Star Trek Voyager video game.
Yes, it was the Star Trek Voyager Elite Force. So they were transported to sort of a graveyard of ships. So that so it was even well, I don't know. It might have actually been post Void. I don't know. I can't remember exactly when that came out.
I can't remember the exact date, but that is my favorite Star Trek video game of all time. Like, I freaking love Elite Force. It is an amazing first-person shooter. It integrates really well into Voyager, the Voyager's culture, the feeling of it. You get to walk around the ship. Yep. You get to be in the quarters. You get to go to the bridge. You get to interact with like everybody reprises their voices, except for Jerry Ryan, unless you get the patch that they released 6 months later.
Oh, cool.
And that storyline, that was actually just a small section of the video game, because it's a large video game, but one storyline is that they get trapped in a graveyard of ships.
Captain's log, stardate 53854.7. Voyager was attacked by an unknown force and transported to some kind of starship graveyard. Whereabouts unknown. The ship is heavily damaged. Communications, propulsion, and other systems are offline. Until repairs are done, we're utterly helpless. Stranded.
And they find an old TOS-era ship, and they meet their descendants on the ship, and they're all wearing like these tattered clothes that are hand-me-downs from hundreds of years later. And I can't remember exactly if they were peaceful or violent, but it was really fun. It was really cool. It was a very interesting dissection of how people would react in that situation on a starship.
That is cool. It looks like it came out in 2001. So it probably was post this episode.
Yes.
Because Voyager went off the air it was 2000, wasn't it?
Yeah, I do believe so.
Yeah, and Void was a season 7 episode? Like the last season?
You're testing me here.
I'm sorry.
It came
You're
out.
You're gone for a short period of time and you cannot remember.
No, it ended. Actually, the show ended in spring of 2001.
Oh, okay.
And this episode was towards the latter half of season 7.
Okay.
So this came out on Valentine's Day of 2001.
So that probably means that the video game was actually, because of how long video games take to make, probably was in production before The Void, or at least, concurrently.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. Again, it's one of those stories that, obviously, in our comparison, it's not new necessarily. So, but it is very cool, especially when I like the graveyard of ships thing. And it was kind of interesting in the animated series episode, the ships that you see floating around are actually discarded concepts for the very first giant insectoid ship that you see in episode 1 of Beyond the Farthest Star. So it is almost like a live action show where they always show, like the Battle of Wolf 359 or the graveyard in TNG of ships, where they have like concepts that they didn't use that they've just dumped in there because it's a model. I think it's great that they actually did that in an animated sense too.
Yeah. You don't really think of that happening, but you're right. I mean, like, that would make just as much sense as a live action show, because I mean, George Lucas, he did that all the time, where like he'll have entire rooms and floors of buildings working on art for his movies, especially, like the Star Wars saga. And every once in a while, like when he was doing like Clone Wars or something like that, he would say he's like, oh, that's right, I have an entire library of unused character designs and ship designs. Let's just pull from that.
Yeah, and I'm sure that they used a lot of those ships in the Coruscant scenes and stuff in Phantom Menace, and although I guess those were digital. So
I've never heard it pronounced Coruscant before. That's why you.
Oh, sorry.
That's why you saw the quizzical look on my face.
It's been a long time since I've actually talked about that, so I don't know. It's like, what's this Star Wars thing that you're
Yeah, what is it? Star Wars?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, no. So I love that graveyard of ships, and I love seeing the SS Bonaventure, which is the supposed first ship with warp drive. And, we're actively trying to retcon that. It's like, and that's actually retconned in the book that Dayton were. It's like the first ship with modern warp drive.
That's like you mentioned before we started recording, you mentioned that you wanted to retcon that. And that's basically what I would have said is, I was like, okay, well, it's the first type of ship that had warp drive like the Enterprise has.
Yes.
And because like if you look at the design, it's so like it looks like a smooshed version of the Enterprise. Like if the Enterprise is a golden retriever, this is a pug.
Yes.
Like,
that is a really good description. And the registry number is 1028 1 NCC. The NCC's at the end. And it's also, okay, whatever the thing is, if the NCC was in front or back, why would you put it on the warp nacelle so it then like has to kind of bend? And they put the words like they painted it and they didn't really figure out where they were going to line it up, and they're like, oh, we'll just put it here. And so it has to kind of go around to bend, and that was just really odd. And it's like, that a designer did not do that.
That was just, yeah, very, very, very slapdash, yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, no, I think that it was interesting, though, to see that sort of history. And apparently in something else, Zephyrin Cochrane's second ship or something was called the Bonaventure that he worked on. So, I mean, there might be... And there's like 2 or 3 different Bonaventures that have been designed very differently. There's one in the Spaceship Chronology book. There's one that was in the background of a DS9 episode. You don't really see the tag, so you can't really say it's the Bonaventure, but when you look at the actual graphic that Mike Okuda worked on, it says Bonaventure. So there's like 3 different designs, or 4 actually. There's a Bonaventure class ship, which is pretty cool looking actually. But anyway, yeah, so I thought the Graveyard of Ships was cool. And I actually really like some of the ships in the Void. That one that came in kind of midway.
Yeah.
Not Malon. What are those characters? The ones who tapped into the Doctor's optical sensors that one time, and when he was the ECH.
Oh yeah, no, I know exactly who you're talking about. Like they look like big squids.
They're almost like the characters in Doctor Who, the potato looking.
Yes, yeah.
Sort of.
I know exactly what you're talking about. I cannot remember. Like they have like a home base that they keep referencing, like the hierarchy. Yes. I think that's what they're actually. I think that's what they're called, the hierarchy ship. Like it's a hierarchy ship.
Oh, okay. Maybe they never said the actual race name. Well, I mean, we've kind of started talking about comparing the 2 episodes. So, what strengths and weaknesses of both? What do you think is the strength of the animated series episode? Because you've really not seen those that much, and Voyager, which we've both seen quite a few times.
Yeah, with the animated series, I've seen all of the episodes, but I was a kid when I watched them, and I've seen bits and pieces here and there as an adult. It was one of those things where it reminded me of those old records, those old Storytime records. I can't remember who made them, but it was all audio plays, and it was even though, like, I don't think they had their voices.
Beep, turn the page.
Yeah, yes, exactly, that kind of thing. It wasn't as cool, like, because
Power Records did
Power
Star
Records.
Trek
That is what I'm thinking of. Yes, the Power Records versions of those stories, where they had like one story where all the crew turned into cats, and they had sound-alikes. Like, I don't think they had Shatner and Nimoy or anything like that. And so that very much reminded me of the animated series, and so that's why I liked it as a kid. One thing that but yes, I've seen Star Trek Voyager a whole lot more than the animated series. Yes. But one thing that I really liked about this episode versus The Void, and this also is kind of a sign of the times when you look at the 70s or look at the 90s, or actually no, this is not 90s, this is early 2000s, which is even more to the point that I'm about to make, is that in the animated series, in Time Trap, they are not going to bring democracy to the Void. They are not the ones who are bringing peace. They I think the Federation and Starfleet in particular are very victims of that, where it's, we are humanity, and so we are the best of the best, and so what we do is, and how we live our lives is how you guys should live your lives, and so we're going to impart that wisdom onto you. But in Time Trap, it was quite the opposite. It's like, you guys are bringing violence to us, so please stop.
I feel like that message sort of fits the time period of the early 70s too, because we've got, it's post Kennedy era, where you did have sort of, Kirk was sort of that, bastion of democracy, and I'm going to bring this to and it's sort of in the middle of / end of, I believe, the Vietnam War. And so you've got, all those writers who were probably more liberal leaning, were, I don't know what I'm trying to say exactly, but sort of they see us or saw the Enterprise crew as more, like you said, that agent of the violence.
Well,
But-
yeah, it's just like in the early, like, with, you could tell that the animated series had this idea of, well, they were like, if anything, if it wasn't the Enterprise, they were at least bringing the Klingons, and that's kind of their stereotypical version of violence. And
That's
that
true.
conflict, even if it wasn't Starfleet bringing the violence, it's Starfleet in conflict bringing the violence. And in Voyager, they very much, like, they even called Catherine Janeway self-righteous many times. Like,
Yeah.
they had several aliens say, you are extremely self-righteous. And Catherine Janeway is. She's an extremely pompous and self-righteous character. And so it fits that she would be the one saying, listen, if you look to us, if you look up to us, we can show you how to work together. Because did you know that? If you work
Right.
together, you can succeed.
That was very bonk bonk on the head, as Mission Log would say. like, okay, yeah, we get it. And I did love when she said, when you see the two people that they basically kicked off the ship colluding, it's like, well, I'm so glad that we taught them how to cooperate.
Yes.
I thought that was
Of course,
great.
she takes credit even for the negative stuff.
Exactly. The writing in The Void had some issues in that sense. It could have been subtler. I think there had to have been a way to do something less on the nose, which is interesting because it feels like Time Trap was actually less stereotypical of a Star Trek episode. I didn't feel quite so much. There wasn't so many of the same tropes. I mean, there was the sciencey stuff, but you even have, you see the inside of a Klingon ship for the first time. So there's a lot of different things that you didn't see before. You see more of the engine room of the Enterprise.
And a female Klingon, too.
Yeah, and that was the second time we saw a female Klingon. And she didn't have any lines, but she was the saboteur. So it was sort of interesting. And on the Elysian Council, we had many women in prominent roles. You know, we had the lawgiver woman, who I guess would be the equivalent of, I don't know, they were all equal members on the council, so there was no, president or anything like that. So
Whenever I hear lawgiver, I think about Planet of the Apes.
yes. Yeah, unfortunately. Actually, we were the last episode we talked about briefly Planet of the Titans, and Darren, who guested, was like, "Oh, is that like Planet of the Apes versus a Clash of the Titans?" It's like Planet of the Titans. I'm like, I like that idea. What I thought was interesting about Time Trap is you have that half-hour time limit of the cartoon. So I kind of feel like it was a little bit of a tighter story. Mm-hmm. I mean, you got Voyager, which had a little bit of, it felt like there was almost padding in places where they were talking too much of the teching the tech and trying to get out. But I don't know. Maybe that's just the difference between the two shows.
Well, I think that's a very fair point. I mean, there's several times that Voyager has a great episode idea, but then the writers realize, oh, okay, this is about 35 minutes worth of material. We need 42. Crap, What are we going to do? Oh, just have him speak some nonsense in astrometrics. And then we're like, oh, okay, great. We got an episode. It practically writes itself. And with TAS, I feel like this episode, they could have, like, this was also a 35-minute idea, but they only had 22 minutes to put it forth. And, so
they could have expanded pieces.
Exactly. Yeah, so I think it's a victim of the same idea, but limited amount of time or too much time.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I actually really loved Fantomi, the character that was the people who were native to the Void. Although I did think it was interesting. It's like, oh, sorry.
Well, no, it's just I think you might be crossing two episodes here.
No, they were in the Void. That was the aliens that learned to talk by tones. They were living on the ships that were floating around in the.
Oh my god! Like
I watched this last night, so
I know. Like maybe I'm the one that is that's confusing here. I am. I'm sorry.
I watched the 37s. Oh no.
No. I know. No, I completely got it confused in my head with another one with the guys who pollute the.
Oh, the Malons.
The Malons. I thought Fantomi was with the Malons in that episode.
Oh, that would have been interesting. No, but they had didn't they have something that they were mutated Malons they were living in the engine room because
that's an even different episode. Anyway, we can get back on track. Sorry, man. Sorry. Fantomi, sorry.
This has been Saturday Morning Trek rebuilding all of Star Trek.
Yeah.
Oh, it's like Crisis on Infinite Earths. It just combines all of the Star Trek episodes into one show.
But no, Fantomi's really interesting. I really liked that, and I like that they, I like those episodes where they find a character who is considered subhuman or less than, and then they just give them the tools, and they're like, oh, holy crap, they're really smart. Like I think Enterprise did an episode with this where there was they were their evolution was working against them, and so there was this quote unquote subspecies that they used as they just let them hang around. They're just kind of like, okay, whatever. We let them help out, like we pity them and everything like that. And then they realize that evolution is going to take care of itself, where the subspecies is going to take over. And then that's when Archer realizes, yeah, we need something like some sort of directive that's like our primary obligation. I don't know what we'd call it, but we need something like that.
I believe that the primary species were they were getting sick, and they had the solution to it, but it wasn't. It was only not a solution. It was just it would lessen the suffering.
Right.
But eventually, evolution, like you said, was just going to take care of it. I liked the way they communicated, but I thought it was interesting. They're like, this is such an ingenious way of teaching people. I'm like, yes, sounds connected to concepts. What a amazing idea! Well, that's almost like talking. Like all it was just sounds instead of, tones instead of words. I don't know. It was just like, I thought that was interesting. But I did like the sort of Simon sounding, the game Simon.
Nice.
Where you, the musical quality of that, and I think that worked really well with the Doctor because the Doctor is such a his hobby is the opera and all of the different types of music.
It's Johnny. He's gonna play Simon. Nobody beats Simon. I want you, Simon.
Simon is the challenge you've been waiting for because it takes coordination of hand and mind just to play the game. And if you get very good at Simon, great rewards await you.
Lovely piece. Did they compose it or did you?
Simon is waiting for you from Milton Bradley.
Now, not to switch gears too terribly much. This is a huge gear
That's
shift.
fine.
But I wanted to mention this before I forgot. As I was watching the animated series, there was a crewman in a red shirt that came on who was a black man. Okay. He looks
Lieutenant Obama?
Yes, he looks like Obama.
Yes. That is Lieutenant Gabler, or Gabler, depending on who pronounces it. Yes, I've seen that. I have a comparison, and I was going to post it, but when I posted it, it was like 2 days before the election. I decided, no, I don't really want to start that.
Yeah.
But it's uncanny. It is very, very strange.
This isn't like some sort of passing resemblance where, I don't know, they just happen to be two black males in Star Trek, like one who likes Star Trek, one who's actually in Star Trek. No, this is weird. Like this is
the larger ears and everything is just it's
the eyes. Yeah, it's just so it's like, because I've seen him in the show before. Like I've seen him in TAS before, but particularly in this episode. Like, don't just go to Memory Alpha and look him up because he doesn't look like Obama there. But watch Time Trap and you will see him and you're just like, holy crap, Obama's actually in Star Trek.
Which maybe is why he likes that so much. He just as a kid he's like, oh hey, that looks like a relative of mine. We see him, like you said, at other times and he doesn't look quite like that, but it is fairly uncanny, and we'll post a picture of that in the Babel conference. Well, and speaking of characters, we also have Kor, the Klingon commander. And we saw him, originally in the episode Errand of Mercy, and he, of course, is played by James Doohan in this episode, unfortunately. But later in Deep Space Nine, and Once More Unto the Breach, he mentions that he served aboard the Klothos, the D5 battlecruiser. And it's just like, that was a direct tie-in to TAS. I think it's kind of interesting. We've talked about Canon a lot on the show, and the more you watch it, there's so many little threads from the animated series woven into other series. So, the idea that it's not canon kind of becomes a little silly. I mean, yes, some of the things that happened in the animated series are a little crazy, but things that happened in the original series and other episodes are crazy. We had a giant Olympian god. How is that any different than somebody cloning and making a giant Spock? It's like, it's actually less realistic in some ways.
See, like, in my mind, like, we could go down this rabbit hole, but in my mind, when it comes to TAS and canon, I consider elements to be canon when they're introduced into Deep Space Nine and TNG, because Deep Space Nine, the writers of Deep Space Nine loved TAS. There was lots of TAS references, and that really pleases me because it's fun, it's interesting, it's Star Trek.
And Enterprise as well.
Yeah, yes, and Enterprise, and it's a lot of fun. And I think, to me, I'm just like, it's a cartoon, it's a kids show. Like, let's not be crazy, okay?
Right.
Let's not be hateful and say, like, oh, it has no value because it's not canon. Well, okay, that's ridiculous. Like, not everything has to be absolutely 100% in line with, stuff that's going to be taking place 40 years in the future. Come on. And then that also works the reverse too, because it's you're able to draw off of it, and because you can draw off of it, it's fun, and you integrate those elements into what is considered quote unquote canon.
Right. Yeah, and I think that when you get it almost feels like a retelling of stories. Like, if you think of the animated series of, like, it's the kids' version of Starfleet history almost. You could kind of see it as that. It's like, well, there are elements that are real, and some are more fantastical than what actually happened.
Yeah, there you go. I think that's a great idea. Like, there's elements that are real, there are elements that actually happened, and then there's other elements that are just for a Saturday morning cartoon.
Yeah.
Well,
in the fact that it's a Saturday morning cartoon that we're still talking about, and you can talk about it without being like, well, and then Shaggy, ran into the room and got scared and then went and ate a sandwich, and that's the episode. There actually is something to talk about, and you have a lot of important issues that were brought up on a children's television show. They have, I don't know. I feel that was sort of unique in its time period for that. Yeah. So,
what did you think about the solutions? Since we're rounding third year, what did you think about the solutions between the two?
I thought, well, visually, I think when they actually left the void, I thought it was interesting because they look very similar. If you look at how they animated the ships going through the kind of that time funnel, it looked really similar kind of to that funnel that they went up in the void. But the solutions, I think, were interesting because in the animated series, it was raw power. I mean, yes, they did have to work together, but it was a matter of energy. And in the void, it was to a point, but it felt like it was also, you needed everybody to be on the same page just so you could escape the other people that are in the void. There was it felt, maybe just because of the time amount of time that we had in the animated series, it felt more like. Well,
I feel if I can interject, I do like what you said about how it's just raw power with TAS. It's very elemental. It's like, okay, we need to work together in order to get out of here. So let's just use our brute strength because we are stronger together. In the void, in the Voyager version, I don't want to say it was much more elegant. It was a little bit more complex.
Nuanced.
Yeah. There you go. It's nuanced and complex, and they had a common foe. In TAS, they didn't have a common foe. They had a common problem. And in the Void, they had a common foe and a common problem, and so they had to work together and use that nuanced technology and everything like that. And so it was much more complex, and that's because they could elaborate off of that because they had the time. And I feel like if TAS had the time, they probably would have done something a little bit more complicated. But I kind of enjoy just our engines just aren't strong enough, and so we're gonna push it to the limit.
Yeah, Well, you did have that little subplot of the Klingons trying to destroy the Enterprise, and that probably would have been expanded out a little bit more. That would have been more
with
of
a vitamin pill.
Yeah, I thought about that too. We're just like, well, okay, here we're gonna put this this supplement in here, and too much iron. I don't know, like
yeah, it screws everything up. Yeah,
yes, and it blinked. I like that it was like bleep bleep bleep. Well, it's just really, really advanced C4.
There you go. I think that does make sense when you say it like that, because it's a 23rd century explosive. Like it could look like anything.
They're probably it's 2 omega molecules that are no. Just kidding. Oh, jeez. And then everything's destroyed. Yeah. No. And what it's just as far as like the actual voids themselves in Voyager, there was no time element. It was just a pocket of space that you couldn't get out of, and it was like some sort of. Did they ever just explain really what it was? It was just a void, right?
It was Voyager, man. It was a spatial anomaly. Like that's.
Oh yes, we got the some kind of. Yeah, with that they did recently. I think it was one of the Next Generation writers or directors had tweeted out the compilation of some kind of. Voyager.
I saw the post. I haven't watched the video yet because I feel like it might be too painful.
It might be, and I was really hoping that the animated series, when Kirk says talks about it being a pocket in time or an alternate universe, I thought he was going to say some kind of alternate universe. I'm like, oh, that would have been great, but he just almost says it, but not quite. In the animated series, you have this thing that it's what did she say? A pocket in the garment of time, which I thought was kind of eloquent. I like that. Yeah. But the fact that time passes so much differently there, it passes slower. So they're saying they're like the council were hundreds of years old.
Yeah.
But they don't look at. I don't know. That kind of didn't match with the outside. Like, wouldn't then?
I think they didn't really explain it well, but I think it's the time passes slowly biologically. I think is what they're trying to say. Is that like so a couple hundred years. Here
on the outside,
or like, actually, I think what they were trying to say is that we like 100 years may pass here, but we're only going to age like a year or something like that. I think is what they're trying to say is that it slows down, like maybe it speeds up technology, but it slows down biology. I don't know.
Which, if that's true, and that is kind of what we were thinking, it's interesting because before they actually meet them and they hear that, Spock ventures that. The descendants of the Bonaventure may still be living because they found like odds are that's not the descendant of the Bonaventure. She's just somebody who was on the Bonaventure.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Like an actual crew member. So I think that's kind of interesting. But yeah, so the solutions I did like the difference, and especially just given when it was written. That it has a very 90s message about the working together, and the 70s was also a working together message, which is good, especially because it's a cartoon, but it was more brute strength.
Right.
So
yeah.
And they both, when they escaped, pretty much had the same amount of time spent. They're like goodbye, and you don't hear anything afterwards really, which is I always same with the last episode of Voyager. I really wanted to have like a half of the show take place after they had arrived, or a whole other episode after they were back on Earth. And it feels like if they had more time, it would have been nice to have more interaction with the Klingons and the Enterprise.
Yeah, there was that. It felt a little stilted to me. Like when it ended, I was just like, it's like, oh, that's it. Like no falling action. It's just like it's climax and then credits. That's
in Voyager, at least you kind of get the you can have dinner with us anytime, and they kind of send the people on their way. So you do get a little bit of a wrap up there.
Right. And it's a benefit of having 42 minutes as opposed to 22.
Yep. So cool. So I think that kind of we covered a lot here. We one of the things we like to do on Saturday Morning Trek is talk about the bloopers in the animated series, and the one that stood out to me was Kirk states that the stardate is 52.2, which is a really really tiny stardate, and if you look at the script, it actually says 5264.2. So he just lost the 64 somewhere when he was reading, or it was edited strangely or something.
That's basically like him saying, Kirk, Captain's log, Thursday.
Yeah. That would be funny. One of the criticisms of the animated series, and you kind of can hear it in this episode, is that they're not really voice actors. So everything's a little bit more toned down. You don't really get that. Like when you did Kirk's log just then, you sounded more intonation like he does in the original series than he does in the animated series. It's more like they're just reading it.
Sabotage.
Oh, and they actually say that in this episode. He says sabotage.
Sabotage. That's right. That's how he says
Yes.
it. Oh my gosh, I love that bit like that's on YouTube where like the director's just like, yeah, no, it's pronounced sabotage. He's like, no, you say sabotage. I say sabotage, or I can't even say it. I can't even
sabotage.
Say it. Sabotage. Yeah, sabotage. And he just gets indignant. It's just so funny.
Yeah. And that was pretty much what I found there. You know, we talk about our Trek tech and technology. We've kind of interwoven that in between. But there was 123 races on the Elysian Council. We had Andorians, Gorns. We had the Bonaventure person that we're talking about. We had an insectoid member, which kind of looks like a Xindi.
Totally looked like a Xindi, yeah.
Yeah. So that's my headcanon is that actually a Xindi insectoid member. We had a Klingon counselor, which is interesting because, like you said, if you had more time, it would have been interesting to see that Klingon trying to talk to the other Klingon. Like, dude, chill out.
And there was clearly humans there too.
Yeah.
And it would have been interesting to
like,
to
hey,
see
these
that
two
conversation
lean to work together. Yeah, exactly. We had a non-air breathing counselor. She had sort of like a dome thing on her head. There was the Philosian, which was the kind of asparagus-looking alien from the Infinite Vulcan. We had a Tellarite, a Vulcan, and then there was like two other unidentified humanoid races. So I think that was interesting that we got to get some of those races that we had before. And this is also the last time we see Klingons in the animated series.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, getting trapped in a void of endless night isn't the only thing we've been doing on Trek FM this week. Here's a look at some of the shows you may have missed elsewhere on the network.
Previously on Trek.fm, Standard Orbit.
You know what the saddest part of this movie was for me? Not that Kirk died, not the Enterprise D got destroyed, when that little girl dropped her teddy bear in the hallway. Oh. And was like, oh, and like my mom was like, that's okay, Data's gonna go back and get it. I remember she told me that.
And they just stepped on it, right?
They lingered on it as well.
Melodic Treks.
I really like the ant scene.
Okay.
The red ants.
Yeah.
I thought that was really cool and it really fit. And I really hated the gopher at the beginning.
Yes.
Because I'm like, George Lucas, get your greasy fingers off this movie, okay?
Stage 9, a podcast about the people who make Star Trek.
I took a Bible and I prayed on the Bible, please God, let me see Tomorrow Never Dies. And I still didn't get to see Tomorrow Never Dies. 19 years later, I'm an atheist. I think it all comes back to that moment.
And that's what else is happening on Trek.fm.
So check out the shows and get in on the daily Trek Talk. You'll find them at iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spreaker, and the Windows Podcast Directory for Xbox and Zune. You can visit our website at trek.fm and view our podcast directory and stream all of our shows right from the website. We'd also like to invite you to leave us a rating and review in iTunes. Not only does it help us know how we're doing, it also helps other people find the show. Before we go, I'd like to thank our patrons, Mike Bovia, Eric Extreme, and Ju Kim. Thank you so much for your support. And if you want to become an associate producer of a Trek FM show, all you need to do is become a patron of the network at the $25 or more level. Go to patreon.com/TrekFM and find out how you can become part of the team. That's patreon.com/TrekFM. Well, thanks so much for being here, Tristan. Where can we find you now that you're off in the world?
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was a lot of fun to talk Star Trek animated. And where you can find me is you can find me on the Nerd Party Network at thenerdparty.com. We just had a big new launch with brand new shows, and now we're giving you Nerd Party episodes every single day of the week. So please go and check that out. You can find me personally on a show called Nerd Nuptial, which is a show that I host with my wife, which is a lot of fun, where we look at nerd life, but through a married lens. And we also just started, I started a new show with former co-host Charlene Schmidt of To The Journey on Trek.fm. We started a show about writing and pop culture, and it's called Punch It, and everybody should go and check it out, and you can find me on Twitter at @TheInsaneRobin.
Nice. I have to check all that out. I've been recently moved, which I think people know by the lack of show that we had in a block. But so I've got a whole backlog of podcasts, so I'm excited about that. And you can find me on Twitter at GeekFilter, and I'm in the Babel Conference a lot. Well, it's time for us to get out of the wood panel den here, and I don't. It feels like there's no stars outside.
It's weird. It's blank.
It's just it's not filled in. Can we even get out of here?
You know what, Aaron? If we work together, I feel like maybe we can get out of here.
I agree. Okay, so we'll 1, 2, 3, and we'll just run at the door?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay.
1,
2, 3. And remember, there is an animated series.
They are putting a device in the warp control